we're short quite a few folks, but looks like they're coming in.
I'll let you know, Carl, that I'm gonna have to jump off early because hour difference of time here, kids getting out, etc. So
Okay.
yeah.
Are you in a different time zone?
I am. I'm in Mountain Time.
Oh, man.
Malheur County, the only county in Oregon on a different time zone.
Is it the whole county?
All but about the south 15 miles of it, but
All right. Well, we're getting close. All right. Why?
Carl, you have a quorum of voting members other than Marette being off screen, but I think she's there. And there's
All Well, great. All right. Well, here we are. At least in Klamath Falls on a rainy day. We got a 1/4 inch of rain today already. So that's a good thing. We got a really important meeting today. We got a lot to talk about strategy wise. We have some updates that Davia is going to give us regarding funding. I have a really exciting announcement to make a little later. But in the meantime, let's check in a little bit. Davia, what have you been doing? Besides forgetting to send the minutes out.
I apologize. I forgot to send the minutes out. I sent a note to Carl to tell him to skip that agenda item and we'll do it next time. I have been birding. A couple of friends pointed out a few rare bird alerts that I did not find any of those rare birds, but it went down to Ankeny. It was just really great. So Ankeny Wildlife Refuge is just south of Salem, and the water is back, and it was just every duck that you can find in Oregon was there, and it was great.
That's nice. That's a nice thing. It's so great to have water. I mean, I imagine, Tim, has it been raining in your country?
yeah, we had it was a week and a half ago. We had some, just like everywhere in Oregon, some pretty good rainstorms. I think one rain gauge in the Oahe was upwards of 3 inches of rain, which is tremendous for this area.
Yes.
But the high elevations were getting a lot versus the lower. But yeah, it's been kind of rainy about every evening or every night. We get a little bit of something lately. So
Oh, that's great. So Tim is going to have to leave us a little early because he lives in a different time zone. Didn't even realize that. Chris Hager, what's going on where you are?
Not too much, also rainy, but we had a great, beautiful weekend. And got to get out and get down into Cresswell area and just kind of hike around a bit for the weekend, but that's about it. Other than that, just kind of gearing up for, I've got family coming in for the first time in a long time in a couple weeks from the East Coast. So we're excited for that.
You've been out visiting them, right? You were out there.
Yeah, we've been trying to get out there as much as we could. And then this is their first trip probably in like 3 or 4 years out west. So it's going to be, it'll be fun.
Well, Chris, you'll be interested to hear what I did yesterday with this rain. We went up into some old growth Douglas fir and got 20 pounds of white chanterelles.
Oh, right on.
Awesome.
I'm jealous of that.
There were mushrooms everywhere. It was like our morel season was so bad. It was so dry. And we walked for miles and saw no mushrooms. And we went up about 6,000 feet and there were mushrooms everywhere. And a lot of them were white chanterelle. So that was pretty good.
That's awesome, Carl. Yeah, I haven't been able to get out do much mushrooming at all this season, and did a little bit during hunting season, but that's awesome. I'm jealous.
It tells you what's really going on in the forest when you get a little bit of water and see how many mushrooms there are. Mark Labhart, what's happening?
Good afternoon, everybody. same thing. Glad to see the rain. It's been raining here in Sisters pretty much all day off and on, but glad to see it. So probably the biggest news for me was we ran out of candy last night for Halloween, which it's a disappointment for when kids knock on the door and you don't have candy for them. So we were digging and chewing around. So it was a pretty, it was a small pony that was all dressed up that was going down the street with the family trick or treating. So it was and of course, everybody's getting pictures with the pony trick or treating. So I'm leaving Friday for the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and we'll be out of touch for about almost a week and a half. So looking forward to that. So,
Are you going elk hunting?
yes, sir. Yep.
Oh, fun.
Yep.
Nice. Murat?
Yes, it's very, very soggy in Sisters today. Just been raining like crazy, and I'm hoping it revives our chanterelle habitat because we haven't seen much yet, lower elevations. And I guess since last time I made an escape to the Oregon coast. That was wonderful. We're so lucky to have the Oregon coast. We were in Newport, checked out the otters and the jellyfish, went to visit Laura Anderson's restaurant in Newport, Local Ocean. She somehow pulled it through the economic crisis with dock boxes and all the other stuff she thought of, new creative things, and still popular. And then I've been writing articles about history for the local newspaper. I just wrote one on the ghosts of Glazed Meadow, talking about an early settler and murders in the Old West. That's about it.
Well, that's interesting, Murat. You always got something interesting you're up to. Kaylin, how are you doing?
Doing well. Similarly saturated, or at least I'm not, but the dog won't go outside either. I had a new experience this last weekend staying sort of like an Airbnb, but for private land camping, something called a hip camp. And so I stayed at a campground right at the confluence of the Little Wind and the Wind River, and saw more eagles than I could count, and just had a really nice weekend on this piece of land that otherwise provides tribal fishing access, but this family wanted to keep the land in their family and figure out a different way to make money off of it. So now they're offering some private land camping and access to local trails, and I found a big old matsutake mushroom there too. So
All right. Nice. Mauricio.
Thank you, Carl. Let's see, lately, plenty of highlights, but perhaps the most salient would be that I got to take my little one spelunking at the Lava Fields National Monument. And the only thing better than the exploration of those amazing caves is the company that we had, which was, of course, our fearless leader, Carl, and his lovely wife. So they were just the most absolutely gracious hosts, and we got to do some pumpkin carving and all kinds of wonderful fall things, and got to experience the basin in a way that we hadn't yet. So very, very grateful for all of it.
Yeah, that was a great treat. We got to entertain Mauricio and his incredible family. He has the greatest family, and we just had so much fun. It was great. Really good. Mark Stern.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see everyone. I guess a couple highlights. One is been working with a group of people on the Elliott State Research Forests for going on a couple years now, and kind of on a timeline looking towards getting some legislative concepts together that would go forth in the short session. And it's been always 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and about 10 to the side. But it looks like the state, the land board staff, OSU leadership, the advisory committee, which includes industry, counties, enviros, school people, are coming together, and there'll be a proposal that everybody, I think, will be able to support. And it will translate into some legislation going forth in the short session next February-ish. So that's been really encouraging to see. And I think that'll be a good outcome. And then the other one is we were at the coast this weekend. It was very sunny and not rainy at all. and just charming. We were out in Bay Ocean Spit, which is Commissioner Labhart, your old backyard anyway, and we saw elk out there, bear scat, peregrines, and a lot of people. So people have found that spot for sure. So it was a good weekend.
I think all of you all are busy doing other things, but I want to point out that Mark has been working on this Elliott Forest thing all along, the whole time he's been on our committee. Every time I call him, he's like, oh, I just got off a 4-hour conference call about the Elliott Forest. He's really worked incredibly hard to make that a viable thing. And that's good news to hear that it's moving forward, Mark. So thanks for your work.
Yeah, a lot of people involved there working harder than I, but it's been a good group effort for sure.
Kelly, you can tell us what's going on your part of the coast.
Lots of Halloween good times, and we had some dance recitals this weekend on personal life level. So my husband is floating the wild and scenic this weekend, so he should be back today, which was a really rainy day, but looked like the other days were good. And regionally, among watershed councils down here, we've been engaging in some leadership training with the contractor, which has been really enlightening. It's a lot of like personnel and HR, but also like, you know, how to deal with people with different personality types and leadership structures. So it's actually super fascinating. And so we're doing that with some of our other coastal partners. Been working with the Rogue River Watershed Council on a Rogue River report card, which has been super neat. So they're using several parameters to look at the Rogue River and basically kind of give it a layman's report card so that folks can understand where problems are and where our successes are. And I would say along that same line, I've seen Mark at a couple of meetings. I feel like I've just been doing lots of meetings lately. The commission, ODFW commission meeting, and then also the OWEB board meetings were last week, and we had the network watershed council board meetings last week. So it's been very meeting intensive lately. But all really, really good initiatives moving forward, and I'm happy to be a part of those and sitting at the table. So I appreciate having a voice there, and I appreciate Mark, your service on those committees as well. And looking forward to some good proposals for this team. So thanks. I like your sweater, Carl.
You're on mute, Carl. We can't hear your sweater commentary.
Yeah, my video, something screwed up there. Okay, you hear me now? All right, Jane Hartline, how are you?
I am just fine. I don't have a lot to report. I actually dove right into those proposals because they were so good, and I'm so excited about a lot of them. And so I've already graded about half of mine, and just wow, what great proposals, and what an interesting, diverse set of things that we have the opportunity to fund. Cool.
Well, Jane brings up, I think you all have gotten those proposals, 37 different projects, some really, really great ones. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at them. That's for our next meeting's agenda. We're really excited about the quality of what we've gotten, and it's just going to be great looking at those. Hey, Michelle, you're always at our meetings. Why don't you tell us what you're up to?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Similar to many of you, it's been very meeting heavy over here lately. We've had quite a few of those, kind of hopefully winding those down a little bit going into December, but we'll see. Lots of Halloween fun this weekend. A couple of grandkids that we had a good time with that. But more back on the business side of things, I have been trying to get the executive appointments office to engage with us about what to do about your guys' renewals. I still haven't gotten a formal response back from folks, but I am still poking at them about twice a week, hoping that they will float to the top before I have to ask all of you to go into Workday and resubmit your applications. And another thing that you may have seen that's come out recently, you should have received an email about annual trainings, which included the preventing discrimination and harassment, information security training, which I believe because you guys do not have state issued equipment, you can disregard that one. But I'm going to send out a follow-up. But if you've received an email from DAS asking you to redo training, that is a legitimate email. Those are the ones that we have to do annually. So, but that's about it for today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for getting all this set up, and it's great to have this Zoom meeting work and where everybody's where they ought to be. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you one thing that's exciting that's happened for me besides having Mauricio and his family. I think many of you know we've been working on this project with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a farm near our house right on Upper Klamath Lake. Been trying to develop a wetland there, and we're really focused on waterfowl and keeping a functional farm. But we finally got the infrastructure in that I could flood our wetland. And we had planted a bunch of grain in it because we knew we were going to flood it, and we flooded it. Within 2 days, we had 15,000 ducks and geese in it. It was amazing. There's no water anywhere down here, even with the rain and the refuge. The count on the Lower Klamath Wildlife Refuge that often has 1 million birds was 25,000 ducks in the entire refuge. We had 15,000 on our 300-acre farm. That's how kind of desperate it is. But it was really so incredible to see all those birds piling in there, and they just eliminate the grain really fast. But anyway, that's been a great thing that's happened here. Again, just having all this rain, it helped us fill it up quick. So it's a great thing. All right, well, great. Well, let's move on. We've got, don't have minutes to go over. We got a couple of things to talk about, but before we do, I got an exciting phone call this weekend that I think you all will be happy to hear about. And what it is really is an endorsement of the incredible work that you all have done. Many of you may know that the state of Oregon and the forest industry and conservation groups just came to an agreement on a Forest Practices Act. This was passed or agreed upon. Apparently went till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, negotiating the final outcome with the governor there and many environmental groups in the industry. And there's some really landmark things that have happened with that. And not the least of which is there's going to be some funding that comes out of this. The amount is not clear. And a lot of the stuff is still, apparently this still has to go before the legislature. And there's always changes, but one of the things that occurred is the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund is mentioned as a conduit for up to $5 million of the funding. And I think that was the outcome of some of our partners, particularly Kristen Rivard of Trout Unlimited. She was our champion. She got us engaged. The rest of the conservation organizations, I think, were supportive. I know Portland Audubon was heavily involved. I had an opportunity several months ago to talk to the timber industry folks and explain to them who we are and what the OCRF was all about. And they were very positive about it. And so, again, because of the great work that you all have done and how far we've come, this, nothing's a done deal, but we're in the paperwork. It's pretty official, it's still up to the legislature, but we may be the conduit for a considerable amount of money focused on, I think, particularly riparian work in the forests. So that's something, there's nothing for us to act on now, but it, again, just points out how important it is that we do, like we have done, the baseline work to make us a strong organization. I'll say another thing too, just the quality of work that you all have done. I think that this didn't happen in a vacuum. I think our constituents, the people that follow us, see what we're doing and the hard work that you have done. Like, for instance, the subcommittee that we put together to vet some of these proposals that come outside of our regular process, they have been so intensive about it and so mindful of doing it right, and really have made that a rigorous process. So I really want to thank those members, Marette and Mark and Chris, that really made that a great process. And I think people see that and recognize it, and the fact that we got named as a potential conduit of this money speaks to that. So thank you all for the work that you all have done. So I was quite excited to hear that.
Carl, when will we know?
I think it's in the formal wording. It's in the formal agreement. And
Okay.
now it's going to be up to I think it goes to the legislature to be passed. And then the timing could be as long as like a couple of years before we see any of the money. It depends on whether they're going to wait till they actually do HCP, completed, or if they're going to start running some fundings through earlier. So I don't know about those details.
Okay,
So
still great news.
It's a moving target still, but again, wanted you all to be aware that was going on and what that could mean for us. I mean, that's a big chunk of money. There's also some money, I think, going through OWEB as well. So, okay. With that, Davia has some, I think, really good, some more great information about where we are. And she was going to do an update with our current funding opportunities.
Thanks, Carl. And I thought I'd start with just a briefing from the October 15th commission meeting. So at that meeting, the commission did adopt the changes that were proposed that formalize the language, or adopt the language from the legislation into our regulations related to the Office of Outdoor Recreation. So not a dramatic change at all there. Added the 4-year term limits that we had talked about, and an agreement that no member will serve more than 2 consecutive terms. And so that'll relate back to what Michelle said about extending your current commitments by at least 2 years if you want to. And then the other thing that happened in October is that the commission did approve the Alaka Alliance communications project that this group approved in early October. And they approved the hiring of the OCRF coordinator position at ODF&W, which, if we are going to have a new flex of funding, that's great to have that person in place and have someone 100% working on this program. So we have that request for a position with the Department of Administrative Services, and we're really hoping that we'll be able to hire them to start in January at some point. And so we're working behind the scenes to get that in place. So what I'm really supposed to be talking about is the current funding opportunity, but I thought I'd throw our fundraising total in here really quickly, just to let you know the impact of those of the restricted gift commitments for the Alaka Alliance, the Green Jobs Initiative, and other projects we've accepted recently. Our current fundraising total is just under $820,000. And with our total of 1.545 million of state general fund to be matched, we're more than halfway to matching all of it, and just over a quarter of the way to matching this biennium's $1 million, if that makes sense. So this is what I'm supposed to be updating you on, is the October 22nd project deadline. And so as a reminder, and for the public that's joining us, when the sunset was removed from the program, the advisory committee said we want to get rolling and have some projects in the door right away. And so you all decided to open this opportunity using our existing materials from last year's opportunity in terms of the application and how we review it, with a $20,000 maximum instead of a $10,000 from last time around. So that opportunity closed on the 22nd. We had 37 applications, as Carl mentioned. And just based on the titles and the way the project are described, I bucketed them by conservation and recreation. Strong recognition that there's a good blend in a lot of these projects. And so I may have called it a recreation project, but it has a lot of conservation and vice versa. But generally about 70% conservation and 30% recreation in terms of what we got. And then I binned them by the ecoregion identified by the applicant. And a lot of them identified more than one ecoregion, which is why if you add up all these numbers, it's more than 37. But generally we hit every ecoregion this time. Still only one in the Columbia Plateau, which is one of the places we haven't had a lot of applications in the past, but a good mix of projects. And so this is what I wanted to make sure that we talk about today, just to make sure that you all feel ready for reviewing these projects. The deadline to submit your scores is Wednesday, November 24th, which is Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So if you're going to be out of town, make sure you get it done early. And each of you has been assigned 18 or 19 projects. Let me know if you have any issue accessing those or knowing which ones are yours to review. And just as a general reminder, we have the criteria A through F that get a score from 0 to 6. And then we have the 2 non-judge factors that look at the track record of the applicant and the, gosh, I don't remember what the other one is, but we have those 2 non-judge factors. The integration of conservation recreation is the other one. So these are the criteria. Again, also for the public attending committee members, you have a copy of these. But these are the A through F criteria that are getting scored in this process, just as a reminder. And at the same time, we will have ODFW staff reviewing each of the projects, and we'll use the same questions we asked them last time, just to give you a sense of how these projects rank from ODFW staff perspective and what questions you should ask of the applicants going forward. And so my plan is the Monday after Thanksgiving, I'll get a summary of all the scores and the staff comments back out to you, which will be about a week in advance of the December meeting. And at that meeting is when the committee will go through the scores and determine a list of projects. And I think one final reminder on this opportunity is that the committee talked about doing 15 projects with a maximum of $20,000 each for a total of $300,000 available this opportunity. A significant number of the projects are less than or significantly less than $20,000. And so I think part of the discussion in December will be, do you want to do 15 projects or do you want to open it to 300,000? And there's some flexibility there. So I think that's all I wanted to share, and just have some time if you have questions or other things we should be thinking about right now.
Does anyone have any questions, Barrett?
I had a hard time putting my finger on the list of who does what, but I think I saw that I was assigned a project for the Deschutes Land Trust and I was a founder. So I feel like there's a conflict of interest there, and maybe I could trade off with somebody, or should I just not do it?
Why don't you send me an email, Maret, and identify which project that is, and I will see if we can trade with somebody.
Okay, thanks.
I think there may be some other conflicts out there that we should, if any of you are assigned a project that you don't feel comfortable reviewing, let Davia know and she'll reassign it. We can't just not do them, because we've got to get all of them the appropriate number. We've got to keep track of who's reviewing what. So just get back to Davia on that if you feel like you have a conflict with any of the proposals. Mark Stern?
Yeah, maybe a question for you, Davia, and it's out of the blue, so you may not have any thoughts on it, but I just wonder on the second criteria that we have, that it's consistent with the Oregon Conservation Strategy. If you've sort of chewed on that a little bit more or thought about it, that, what does that mean? Or if you have any guidance to us, I mean, if it just says, well, it's something on ferruginous hawks, which is a strategy species for one of the ecoregions, then it automatically gets a maximum score, or how do you think about, or do you have any thoughts or guidance on how we might distinguish or begin to parse out a little bit, where does it really hit a home run and where is it just sort of in the ballpark?
Yeah, great question, Mark. And I think that's one of the things we all should talk about this afternoon for sort of designing the next opportunities, is being really clear about those things. What I've thought about is that we've shared with you the priority species by ecoregion. That's part of the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And so there could be a paradigm where you say, okay, if it's one of those 5 species in the ecoregion, that would be the top score. Or, we have the key conservation issues in the Oregon Conservation Strategy. So if it's advancing efforts in one of those key conservation areas for one of those high priority species. And so, yeah, we didn't put any of that out there to the applicants. So I think we would want to, be consistent with however you did it last time. But I think we should be building that kind of thing into the criteria for consistency and to help kind of be comparable across reviewers.
Okay.
Mark, that's a great segue into this afternoon and what we want to talk about. So we need to keep your question in mind. Jane?
Just wanted to say that I really appreciated the staff review in the last round and found it extremely useful. So Davia, please pass on that we really take that seriously, and it's important to us to see what they think of the projects. And I heard one of the staff people say, well, we didn't really know whether you're going to pay attention to that or not. And I just want to assure them we're totally paying attention to it. And it's important information for us because they're just, they're on the ground. They know these people, they know the projects, and I really want their input.
We got a lot of agreement on that from in the chat thing. So we really got to incorporate that into moving forward. And I think as I was thinking about this potential forest practices funding, that's going to be even more important. We really have got to have a tight relationship with the staff and making sure that we're following their priorities. And again, that's something for us to discuss later this afternoon. Is there anyone else have any questions regarding this round of projects and what we're going to need to do? What I would ask, the last slide Davia put up is our criteria that we use that, and it's been successful. We got some pretty objective numbers using that. Is there a way for you to put that up real quick, Davia? I just want everyone to look at this because that also is going to be part of our discussion this afternoon. We have this project review criteria. We came up with these, I think, in an effort to be strategic and to be thinking about how we were going to actually make an impact on our priorities. And so I know myself, as I went through these, there were a few times it was kind of hard to figure out exactly how things fit in. So we should be thinking about how we can buff this up a bit and make it even better. I think it's served us well, but there's always ways to make it better. So at some point later on, Davia, maybe we could pull this up again as we're having our discussion. Now, one more thing I'd like to do before we go into that discussion is talk a little bit about the funding. And part of moving forward from here, we all need to be up to date and up to speed on our monies, what we've got, what's available. It's kind of it's confusing to me sometimes. Like we have some money that we can spend now. We have some money that we can spend after we've matched it. We have to be thinking about how we're going to move forward and set up our funding programs based on when money's available and how it's going to become available. Like for instance, we have $1 million from the state that's available when we match it. Well, we're doing quite well with that. Like we're getting close to $300,000 this biennium. In fact, Davia, could you, well, I'll try to remember what we've got. We have had $120,000 from Meyer for wild diversity, that one project we approved last year. We got, right just last week, $100,000 for the Forest Park project that we did. We've got another 30,000 or so from Keene for some projects associated that we previously funded. And we have the 50,000 from Roundhouse Foundation for the Sea Otter project. Those are monies that have come in that we can now apply towards our match. So it's getting close to 300,000, and plus we're still raising around 9,000 to 10,000 a month on the ODF&W site. So really it's a great start, but I want everyone to keep in mind, we still have $700,000 we got to match over the next biennium. And the other thing that was pointed out to me, because the way the biennium works, we really need to try to make that happen as soon as we can, because if we get the money the last day of the biennium and we got to spend it that day, it's a little bit crazy. So I want everyone just to be aware of how that money flow goes. So we really need to continue to be focused on raising that money through the match. Davia, does that kind of cover the funding part? But we do have, so we have $300,000 available for this funding round. Our next plan that we talked about in one of our previous meetings was our next funding round, I believe, was going to be 50,000. And what was our expectation there, Davia? Was it?
Yeah, sorry, I have this all written down, but my mouse has stopped working. I'm trying to touch my non-touch screen here. So we said 300,000 for this opportunity. And in the notice of funding opportunity that went out for this, we indicated that the committee wants to open an opportunity later this year before Christmas that would do another 15 projects with a $50,000 maximum, which would be $750,000. And if I can get this slide up, I've got all of the funds available, which I think is helpful, but also still confusing because there's a lot of information there. Next slide. Are you seeing the review criteria?
I'm sorry?
Which slide are you guys seeing?
Review criteria.
Seeing project review criteria.
My computer is very mad at me today. Okay, trying again. Sorry, everybody. Okay, seeing it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I've done here is try to capture all of the funds, what I'm calling available in 2021, 2023. And I put that in quotes because the source of funds here would be $1 million that is privately raised. And so I mentioned earlier that we're a quarter of the way through that. But should we raise all of the million, that would be part of this 3.5. $1 million of the general fund, which was appropriated in House Bill 2171. $545,000 of general fund also appropriated as match for what we raised in the last biennium. And then the $1 million from the recovery stimulus package, and that's federal funds that were earmarked by Representative Helm through the legislature. And so those four sources combine into this $3.545 million available this biennium. And so what I have here, this all adds up to $3,545,000, all of these lines. The first one is the approved program administration that you did at the last meeting. The second one is $300,000 to go into our matching program, essentially assuming that we would raise $1 million solely on restricted gifts. We need to make sure we have that general fund available to meet the match commitment. The third line here is the project opportunity we're working on right now, where we said $300,000 available. The next line is the project opportunity that could be upcoming depending on the conversation today, but we did put that in the notice that that is the intent. And that leaves about $2 million left. $1 million of that is the federal stimulus money. And we still don't have that money in hand. Department of Administrative Services is working on it, and we have applied and we've submitted the forms that they've asked for. And so we don't have a timeline on that, but we do know that those funds need to be spent by the end of 2024. So they go a little bit past the biennium. And we don't have a strong sense of the sidebars, if we can spend this on anything that the OCRF would fund anyway, or if we need to put a little bit more sideboards on that. We don't have that information yet. And then that would leave about $1 million that's not part of our two upcoming opportunities and currently unspecified for a purpose. And so that is one way to look at the funds we currently have available, and I hope that is helpful.
So Davia, basically what that means is we won't spend that 750 until into a bit of the next year, but then we would have 2 million essentially for projects down the road for the rest of the biennium. And then
assuming that we meet the fundraising target, yes.
If we raise the funds that we anticipate raising, then we also have this $1 million from Fishhawk Lake settlement that is through Oregon Wildlife Foundation. So we have some money to spend, and as we're talking about, I want everyone to be aware of this because it's important when we move into thinking about our priorities and how we're going to do this. We need to always have in mind what money's out there. We don't. The nice thing about that Fishhawk Lake money is it's not necessarily, we don't have to spend it in this biennium. And so that gives us some flexibility. But some of this money we do. So we have to be prepared. We don't want to get caught on the wrong foot. Again, it points out the importance of raising the match as soon as we can and be able to deploy this like early in the second half of the biennium rather towards the end when we're kind of scrambling. So it's just important to everyone keep this kind of stuff in your mind. Mark Labhart.
Well, and just to add a little more optimistic confusion to this, the infrastructure bill, which I think we all hope will pass, there is some significant amount of federal dollars that could come to Oregon. In fact, if been doing a little research, there's 350 million budgeted for wildlife crossings across the country. And, we funded wildlife crossings, so I would suspect that Oregon would get some of that. And there's going to be other money in there, that infrastructure bill for, I think, OCRF. And with the new legislation in 2171, that federal money can now be part of the $1 million match where it wasn't before. So that's some good news. So I think there's some room for optimism that if this package passes, we might be adding to that 3.5 million. So we'll just have to stay tuned.
Wow. I hope Jane Hartline.
well, this is maybe changing the subject. Davia, I was just curious whether you had added up the amount of ask on the 37 proposals for this round.
I have, and I'm not sure I have it handy, Jane, but I will pull it up and I can let you know in a minute.
Okay, no problem.
I wanted to, I guess, Mark, we're so fortunate to have Mark Labhart on this committee because he seems to know everything that's going on and has his finger in every pie. So as that funding becomes available to us, Mark, and talking to the folks that you talk to, I think, having some of that money as we could provide the conduit for that money. I know you mentioned the wildlife crossing issue, which is so important for us. And we have one really good project in this current round. And I know of at least one more that their intention is to apply in the next round of funding. So we could in fact focus on that kind of project and maybe would be able to be a appropriate conduit for those types of funds and have those projects lined up. So keep us apprised of what you're hearing, Mark, and keep us in mind for that. Great. God, that's just cool. Cool stuff.
So the answer to Jane's question is 614,480.
Is that the ask or the,
if you were to fund all 37 projects, that would be the price tag.
I see. Okay. But some of those projects are for way more than are.
Yeah, so I can look at that number too. We asked about total project cost. That would be 19 million.
Okay.
There's probably one really big one in there.
So we're a sliver of that, but we're there. Okay, well, all of that conversation, Mark Stern.
I just wondered, Mark Labhart, are there any timeline? Is there a timeline on that Fishhawk Lake funding that it becomes available when and has to be spent by when? Does it have a time frame to it at this point?
I think that's a question for Davia, but it's in the Wildlife Foundation pocket, and so I think she's probably better to answer that than I.
Yes, so the Wildlife Foundation has that money already. And they are going to transfer about half the price of the staff position and cover that with the Fishhawk money, and then we'll get the match for that. And then we're looking at putting together kind of a joint team of the foundation board and OCRF folks. And this might be the call to see if you want to help do that, to find a way to double that money before it comes to the OCRF through some sort of matching campaign or other opportunity. Because now we have the ability to say any dollar you contribute to the OCRF will be matched by $1 from the general fund and at least $1 from the foundation. And so we want to keep that money in the foundation until we really need it. If the next biennium is not as good to us, we would have that as a backup.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up. I know that Tim at the Wildlife Foundation is very interested in getting some corporate, we've had some corporate sponsors, but not in a big way. But this may be a way for us to reach out to the Columbia Sportswears and the REIs. And so I don't think we're going to do that at this meeting, but let me just ask by a show of hands, those of you that might be interested in serving on that committee. We're going to make a committee that's going to be a conjunction with some folks from the Wildlife Foundation and then us, and sort of strategize and think about how to do that. So I'm going to need to appoint some folks, and I thought I'd see who had an interest in doing that. Any of you would like to? If you don't raise your hand, well, we got one. Kelly and Chris, nice. Mark Stern.
I'm interested to know more and hear more, sure.
I would do it if you need me. I'm not jumping up and down, but I would definitely.
Well, Jane.
I mean, Mark Stern. Oh, sorry, Jane.
Okay, well, that's, I just wanted to get a sense of that because we'll move forward with that. Not right now, but I appreciate that. Thank you all, because that could be a pretty cool committee. I think we got some opportunities to do some good stuff. All right, great. All right, so that kind of takes us in. That's all a great segue into our discussion. I think you all are aware why we're talking about this. I mean, we were sort of scrambling. We formed the organization, we raised some money, we spent some money. We're really kind of scrambling. And considering the timeline and the COVID and the Zoom meetings, we did very well. I'm very proud of our framework and how we have distributed funds. But now that we have shown that we can be successful, and this is a good program, I think it's really important that we revisit some of the questions that we already asked ourselves. And now that we've got something under our belt, we have the option of just saying, okay, this is great. Let's just do it exactly like we're doing it. Just have a funding round every 6 months and with the same priorities and all of that. That's certainly one of the outcomes of this conversation. Is we say, well, we got it. We pretty much figured it out. Or we could tweak that, the process that we have. We could add to that. There's different ways to allocate the money that we have, say, to particular priorities. Or we can make our RFP process a little more specific and identify specific priorities that we think are really important and timely. And kind of to kick that off a little bit, Davia did, I think she talked a little bit about this previously, but she had talked within ODF and W, like what does ODF and W really need when they look at the OCRF? What are the priorities that they think we should be really focused on and addressing? And Davia, can you just kind of give a little bit of a synopsis of what the feedback you got on that?
Sure. I'd say the top line message is that ODF and W needs support on gathering baseline information on the status and trends of Oregon conservation strategy species. And we have particular gaps in the reptiles, amphibians, and bat species. And that was kind of the top message there. And one of the ways that a lot of staff are interested in getting that kind of information is building out community science capacity, having all Oregonians who are out in the woods and on the shore and participating in our activities, sending information back to the state to help us know where those species are on the landscape. And then new technologies that help us get a lot of that data quickly, like eDNA or the MODIS observation network, were some of those top things that came out as things ODF and W would do if we were deciding what to do with the OCRF money directly. And so those were the key messages I think that I wanted to bring forward.
So the first part of this discussion, I would like to hear a conversation. Like, I don't believe, Davia, we have any actual action items for the rest of the meeting. Tim was asking that because he didn't leave early, but this is more of a process that we're making sure that we're thinking of things that we all want to have a major impact on the things that are important to us. And this is a process to help us think through how we can do that.
And I'd just say, I would say that I think there are some action items, maybe not things that the committee is going to vote on, but the way that the agenda is framed is to talk about those priorities, and we don't have to limit it to ODF and W's priorities, right? We had a great presentation from Kaylin about about the governor's task force on the outdoors and what kind of work came forward there, and then other priorities from Parks and Rec. And we've heard from partners in the past about other interesting priorities that are out there. But in terms of what we have on the agenda, we kind of broke it out into 3 things for today. The first is talking about priorities. Do you want to hone in on any particular species or habitat type or key conservation issue? You know, we could, as an advisory committee, decide that we need to focus in on climate change, and all of the projects we fund should be seeking to help a species adapt to climate change. And that would be a great priority to come out of it, but I don't want to presuppose anything, but I think those are the kind of things we should talk about now. What are those things advisory committee members want to bring forward, and try to have a decision point that narrows a list of priorities there. And then a conversation about how do we go about doing that? Like Carl said, we could keep having an open RFP every 6 months and adjust our criteria to try to highlight those projects that seek to meet our priorities. We could also have a pool of funds that are for specific things. So Mark Stern and I had talked a little bit about this. You know, if the committee says our priority is Western pond turtle, Northwestern pond turtle, what will we actually do, right? And maybe what we need is an Oregon statewide habitat priority ranking for Northwestern pond turtle. And we could use OCRF funds to do an RFP to hire somebody to do exactly that. And so there's those kind of opportunities that we can talk about. Once we know what priorities we want to address, we can talk about how to address them and how to spend our funds to do so. And then the last part I have on here is changing the expenditure framework and application. And I think that part is more of a direction to me and ODF&W staff to revise documents and bring you back in December a path forward based on what we discussed today.
Does everyone understand kind of what we're asking here, what we'd like to talk about? I mean, we got a little bit of direction from ODF&W. We're saying reptiles, amphibians, and bats. But within each of you and your experience and what you're doing and what's important to you and in your ecoregion that you represent, there are issues that might be really important to you that aren't necessarily being addressed, or just that you look across the state and think, man, we really ought to focus on that. So I'm just interested in hearing what those thoughts are. Or again, if not, like we're hitting it pretty good, this is working great, we don't need to change it, that's an option. Mauricio.
Thank you, Carl. I feel that we should probably also remember the spirit that brought this fund together and what brought us together, just sort of like a way to address some of those needs in a way that has not been provided prior to. And I think that one of the greatest potential that we have here as OCRF is to be responsive and adaptive to the needs that we have already, but also that may come up, and also the interconnectedness between conservation and recreation. And I think that the more focused that we can be, the higher the impact that we could have. And I feel also long-term, the higher the potential for other funders to see us as a viable way to get dollars to the right causes in a way that may just skip some bureaucratic steps that they would find elsewhere, to be more assertive in the way that we go after the things that require the most need and more attention that maybe are not having them, precisely because some of those structures are so complicated to navigate and do not have the same type of autonomy that we may have otherwise. And so I would love, for instance, to, let's say if Western pond turtles is the theme that we identify needs the greatest help, that we also have, as someone has said, the knowledge to know which would have the greatest impact, the largest geographic impact, or even maybe motivate folks that we are known to be experts, known to have done great work in that area, to create new ways in which they can connect the two categories. Here's the first thing that came to mind, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling. But what if we knew an organization that has the broadband and perhaps the experience to say we can connect with all these organizations that are already there, either hiking, whatever, you know, they are working the space of recreation, and then give them the tools to collect community science data that could be useful for that is the gap missing on data collection for Western Pontotoc. I think it would be fabulous if we not only are just a purse where people can come and get funding for their projects, but we are also generating innovation and inspiring ideas out of these organizations already doing the work to get us where we need to be, and addressing those needs and those gaps that ultimately made us, you know, that's our origin story, sort of.
Thank you, Mauricio. That's great. Jane?
So in going through this round and doing the rating, I found a couple of things that I wondered about how we might articulate. One is sort of the importance of the project. And I think we get at that in the second ranking, which is the fit with the funding strategies. But I just wonder if there's a way to word that. Like, some things are just more important than others, and I don't know how you get at that, but something to keep in mind during our discussion this afternoon. Another thing that is a little bit unrelated, but on a couple of things, the cost effectiveness of the project was something I thought, this is an awful lot of money for, you know, this project is like a little bit of money and it has a huge impact, and this one has a lot of, we're asking for a lot of money and it's going to affect 12 people. And so I didn't have any way to deal with that. So that's another thing to keep in mind, I think.
You know what, if this was in person, which is what we had hoped this would be, we'd have somebody up there with one of those big boards, and they'd be flipping the pages and writing all this stuff down. But I think we can keep track of some of these things. Like, again, Mauricio's idea of the intersection of recreation and conservation, and then cost effectiveness, those kind of pieces we need to kind of keep track of, and what it is that we find important. Is there anyone else that has something that they feel like we need to focus on or talk about?
Carl, I'll just interject and say that I'm taking notes, and I'll try to put some themes on a slide, and we can try to review things at the end.
Right.
As though there was a live in-person board.
Right.
I was just thinking about continuing the idea of building collaborative capacity for ODF&W. It's great that we're supporting nonprofits, but a lot of this came because ODF&W doesn't get enough funding. And what happens if we disappear? You know, who knows what happens in the next 4 or 5 years. And projects that involve ODF&W that help them build relationships with nonprofits. I saw how this worked with the Forest Service. We started really more collaborative work, and it was just a snowball in the White Chiefs watershed. The more partnerships we had, the more things got done, and everybody felt like they were part of the solution. So it was really a very healing thing in groups that have been fighting for a long time. And so just the idea of continuing to sort of think about ODF&W and its collaborative capacity, and not leaving them out. I mean, projects maybe that involve ODF&W, rating out a little bit higher. They are the ones that are gathering this data. And you can also have people gathering data that is not very useful. It's collected in the wrong way. It's not presented in the right way. It's not scientifically valid or statistically valid. So having that kind of expert oversight on some of it.
Wow, that's great, Brett. And what Maurette spoke to, I don't know if you all recall, early in our process, in our very early meetings, we had a couple of folks that were involved in the genesis of this organization. And they asked us not to forget that that was the reason we were set up, is to support ODF&W. It's exactly what Marat just spoke to. That was some folks from the Wildlife Society. Oh my gosh, I can't. You remember who that was, Davia? That was very,
Leland.
very articulate about that, and how don't forget that this is what the OCRF is really all about. So that's really important for us to keep in mind. There was someone else that had something.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in before I have to take off.
Sure.
I'm going to kind of mirror a little bit of what Mauricio said. Is when I first seen this opportunity to be on this, like I was super excited to have conservation and recreation title together. I'm a strong believer that recreation can build conservation advocacy, and I just want to stick to that, like keep that as our goal, that, we can get people on the landscape, we give them the tools to how to collect data. There's a lot of other avenues that we're going down too as well, but just back to the very beginning, that I just want to keep that on the forefront.
Thank you, Tim. This is great stuff. I just like thinking about it, because one of the nice things, we're now in this position, we're not scrambling, and we've got a solid deal. We can impact, what Tim was just saying, we can encourage that. We can encourage our applicants, if we articulate it correctly, we can put out there, hey, we're really wanting to get people engaged in conservation through recreation. And when we set up our criteria, we can build that into it. But we can now, instead of just sort of randomly getting projects, we can put out there what kind of things we really want to see, and that can be powerful. So, thanks for that, Tim. Jane?
Well, I just have to come back at that and say that I think that's really great, but we also have some strategy species that really, like the Western pond turtle, that are pretty shy and don't necessarily respond well to a lot of recreation around them, even if that's people just counting them. If you get too close to them with your boat, they jump in the water and then they get all cold and their body temperature goes down and they don't develop their eggs. And, there's just, I just want to keep in mind that one of the impetuses for this whole program was to fund some of these non-game wildlife projects that may not necessarily be recreation opportunities. So I guess that as much as I like it when I see citizen science aspects of proposals, I don't want to set it up so that we rule out the more pure science that doesn't have an opportunity to involve a human-centric part of it.
That's what's great about our committee. I know that Jane is going to keep us on track in that regard. Chris?
To kind of go back to earlier statement, but I think Mark said, just around the conservation strategy as well. I kind of like the point that you made, Carl, around maybe putting out or advertising what we're looking for on a more of a collaborative effort with ODF&W. As much as I do love the connection of recreation, there's a reason why we weight the conservation strategy so hard in our scale, because that's what this money needs to focus on the most. And I think good conservation is going to promote good recreation. So,
Mark Stern.
Yeah, I think a couple different points, but following up on what you, Chris, are thinking, and Davia, you mentioned before the staff had said amphibians, reptiles, and bats were groups that the staff wanted more information about. I think in part, I would also look to the staff to help us better define what that is. Are there certain species of bats that they need more information on, or of the reptiles or the amphibians, and help narrow it down? And also to the point of saying, well, maybe the question is, we don't know of these 4 species of bats, which, we need information on all of them, but have them help us refine where those needs are. And then a little bit also, as we've talked about it, for some of the species that have been, more studied over a longer period of time, and pond turtles comes to mind as one. I bet the working groups or the state or the feds collectively, they have ideas on what would a management goal look like for a particular species. Is it, X number of secure populations with Y number of breeding adults that produce Z number of young every year in these ecoregions, so that sort of I think, Jane, you made the point, which are the most important projects? Is it, are pond turtles on their last leg, so to speak, in the Willamette Valley, and that's where the focus ought to be, or is Southwest Oregon or a different species? But I think the staff could really potentially help us in the conversation of knowing what we might set out RFPs for to get more information and help refine that a little bit. So that was one thought, and I think that also builds on sort of the partnerships of, having ODF and W staff continue to work with some of these working groups that I'm sure they're already connected with. I also think that the partnerships and the recreation and the DIE piece is something we have to think about. How do we be a little bit more intentional about it? Because I think we were intentional for the second round of RFPs, and that generated some projects and that we funded. And I know we've talked about integrating it, and it is one of the scoring criteria, which is great. But I think we also needs to be a conscientious effort if it's going to happen. And how do we create those partnerships that bring that broader audience in to garner more support for Oregon wildlife going into the future? And then I guess the other one, I don't know where to park this one, but Davia, you brought it up. Climate change, seeing climate change and adaptation seems like a relevant topic these days. I'm not quite sure how that ties into the projects we're thinking about, but certainly catches my attention as we think about that going forward.
Yeah, that again, just the kind of things that I think of is in our scoring protocol, you could have things, and we'll talk about this kind of stuff later, but you could have climate change as a bonus point. Like, I'm thinking of like a beaver project that's a good project, but boy, it's really going to have an impact on water and could be important in ameliorating climate change. And then you would have a place to put it a point. Okay, that one gets an extra point because it impacts climate change. That's just a thought about, and we have a whole time period to discuss how we might do that. Kaylin, it looked like you had something.
Yeah, thanks. Really good discussion. I had just a couple of process points rather than sort of where to focus criteria, but one thing that I've heard appreciation for from applicants is the relative simplicity of applying to this program as it compares to many other grant programs. So hoping that the committee keeps that in mind as additional criteria are added and evaluated going forward, just that folks have noticed that. And kind of to Mark Stern's point, that one thing that I see as different here and helpful in the success of the program, even if there's room to do more, is that cultivation of applicants and being on hand to help folks through the process and conduct, individual outreach and maintain those relationships. That's how strong partnerships are built. So those are sort of key process points from my perspective. And then the last is just a comment that as sort of specific funding criteria or goals are established, one thing that I've learned that really helps both agencies or organizations is understanding the time horizon. So if you don't jump from one top criteria to another top criteria or top priority to another top priority, it's going to really help the organizations that we're trying to support, whether it's an agency or a nonprofit, to do their own financial planning and work planning. So if the committee does decide to focus on one thing for the next application period, perhaps we could consider, for the June 2022 period, it'll be X, but then also announcing what the next round would be at the same time would certainly help applicants know where they fit in. So just a couple process points for me.
Kaylin, I think it's worth expanding on your observation that you've had feedback that our application process is simple. I like that about us, and I don't want to mess that up. Did you get any is it because it's a short application, or it's online, or why did they feel it was easier than other applications?
Well, they're all generally online at this point, but it was, yeah, brevity, flexibility, right? So the fund is still sort of inclusive in a way that many other applications are a little bit more narrow in terms of what they're looking for. And then that appreciation for actually talking to committee members and helping, having a person, and this will be even better with, an additional dedicated staffer, be able to just talk to someone and help. So that's really what engagement looks like to me, is having that relationship building be something more than just sort of a one-off email exchange. Here's our criteria, go read it, applications are due on X date. It feels like there's just a little bit more, it's a little bit more personal in the OCRF exchanges I've experienced. So.
Did any of the rest of you have feedback regarding that, Kelly?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm glad you brought that up, Kaylin, because I tend to listen into these conversations and look at the criteria as if I am applying to it, because that's what I do in my world, is all grant funded. So I agree with Callan that it is really, really important. I mean, every single other grant in my whole world is so specific and so finite, and you can do salary time, but not materials, or you can do this, but not that. And they are very specific. You can't match federal, you can't match this. So it gets really, it does get really hard to manage at some point of just putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So when we do have this looser money, like this money, and also a few other organizations, it is super, super helpful as the glue to move projects forward for a lot of small organizations. And I do think keeping those relatively uncomplicated is a really good bonus for us. I mean, I agree that it's really nice to be able to answer all these broad questions about climate and how you're impacting climate and how you're impacting your entire community and how you're impacting the world, but it can sometimes just grow like too big for even, I think, smaller organizations and some of the people that we're actually really trying to reach out to with the equity lens to actually apply to these funds. So that's what's cool about this one so far. And I hope that it does kind of continue to stay that way. Sure, we'll need to refine it and I think fine tune it. But I think if we are looking at equity lens, like this is a place where people can enter and move up through this landscape too. Because I mean, most people aren't going to get a NOAA grant or a PMAP grant like their first time around. I mean, those are really intensive things and they do really great work. So I would agree with that on this process as well. One suggestion may be kind of the way OWEB does their cycles, where they'll do, you may concentrate on technical assistance and conservation or whatever in one round. And then the June round is like, something about recreation or strategy species. So maybe you do kind of have a focus, but switch it throughout the year. Because people are, I'm writing grants now for like 2024. You're already thinking like really far ahead. And so I'm putting these pieces together. So if I know when things are coming up, it's really helpful to me for planning those out. And then just on another switch topic, I'm really glad Rhett brought up the ODFW, because I was thinking about that too. We have so many good partnerships with ODFW down here, and they donate so much of their time, and they're always doing in kind with our grants. Yet we don't have the proper biologists to be here half the time to get the work done. And then also, other grantors are asking for this information and the data that we don't have. So I think, like I said, kind of getting two birds with one stone and being able to involve ODFW to maybe complete some more data collection or, something additive would be a really good slant to like give some bonus points or extra if we're looking at achieving both goals through this work.
Wow, Kelly, you're going to have a really good insight. I'll ask you to keep track of that so that if you say, wait a minute, you're getting way too complicated, you'll, keep your eye on that for us, because you and Tim, who had to sign off, are unique in that way, and that you're applying for these funds and know what's good and what's bad. So keep us on track that way. Mark Labhart.
Well, I know I'm not part of the group that weighs in on this, but I just thought I'd offer this. OWEB has an interesting, and Kelly kind of made me think about it a little bit. They have an interesting process. They have what they call an open solicitation process where anybody can apply. And as long as they meet, of course, the OWEB criteria for an open solicitation statewide. And then they have another program called the Focused Investment Program, Focused Investment Project, where the board has identified specific things as this is where we also want to focus. And so, whether it's just use, I'm looking at Jane right now, so I was thinking of pond turtles. If that's what this group wants to say, a focused investment, or bats is a focused investment, you can put out an RFP that says we have focused investments, but we also have an open solicitation process. So you can do and for folks that want to apply for whatever projects is out there. And that seems to work really well for OWEB, because they have a priority that they want to do, but they also say, hey, we've got an open process here that we fund. And it does include ODF&W in that. So just a thought.
Mark, I hope you don't feel like you are part of this process. You're not voting, but you and Kaylin, you should feel totally on equal with everybody else in terms of your comments and your input. I know I look at that and I feel like the rest of the committee does as well. So please don't hesitate to put your comments in. Jane? You're not on mute.
There I am. I just want to say that I really agree with that I like the idea of having some focus areas, but also having it open so that there are other great projects that maybe we haven't thought about. There's an opportunity for those to at least apply. So I think I want it both ways.
Well, that's that we're getting close to as we move into the next discussion, which is, maybe we could talk about that. Is like, what's the mechanism on looking at these priorities? I'm hearing pretty articulate support for kind of doing it the way we've been doing. It's simple, it's nice, it's welcoming. We're getting people on board that have a hard time getting into the system, and so certain things about the way we're doing it are good, and we don't necessarily want to change it. But I'm also hearing there might be some opportunities we can be more focused. Anyone else just in this general, Mauricio?
Yeah, I'm with Jane, and I think we have the ability to still remain versatile in the way that we go about this, while at the same time navigate priorities and be like I mentioned before, just have a more focused, intentional impact on the needs that elicited the creation of this fund. And going back to an earlier of Jane's comments, I think a good portion of it could also come down to just really identifying what is the real world impact on the way that we look at the projects that we're evaluating. How much of it is really going on to planning or logistics or projections or brainstorming or things along those lines that I feel of course very, very important. But if it's really just going to be in a very contained, just to have the ability to know what is it really doing in the real world for those species, for those efforts out there. I think I'm not sure that we necessarily have to change the way the framework is set up, but just to, as we go through the outcomes and the monitoring aspect of each of those projects, for us to have the mindfulness of imagining what is it really doing for the shared outcomes that we have. Even and I'd say even try our very best to look outside of the things that are dear to us personally. We all have our own sort of like spheres in which we live, that have their own priorities and things that are dear to us. But can we just step out a little bit more and see this more systemically, and then try to imagine what kind of impact it's having out there for the Oregon conservation strategy, as well as the human implications of how we get to have more folks care about what the Oregon strategy does.
We got a lot to think about. These are good comments. Marat?
Well, just jumping back to people for a moment, not to forget DEI emphasis and emphasis on kids and youth education, because all of us are getting older and we need people that care. And Mauricio always says you only love the things that you know about. And so, you know, some kind of emphasis still on youth education, underserved populations. I was going to ask Kaylin, I was looking through my notes on your presentation, and you did talk about youth and underserved folks, but you also said there was a high percentage of disability. A lot of folks are using, or something like 98% of Oregonians go out, and I didn't quite get the disability part of it, whether they're severely underserved and whether there would be benefits and more attention to that.
Yeah, thanks for I'll just answer really briefly that, you know, the vast majority of the population of Oregon participates in outdoor recreation in some way. And of the subset of folks who aren't getting outside, a much larger proportion than you would expect report that they or someone in their home have a disability. And so, yes, the disabled community in Oregon is an underserved community when it comes to outdoor recreation. I can't speak to whether that would be true in terms of, you know, on the ground conservation work or citizen science, but you might expect that would be true as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's the place where like the subjectivity of the cost benefit thing really has to be worked out, I think, too, because it is, you know, maybe that group of 12 kids is, you know, it's a disability community or it's something else. So maybe it is a lot of money to put something in to practice, but, you know, it's all on a scale kind of, I think, depending on where you are, or some of those might just be really regional areas and so they don't have as many people to reach. So I think it's a hard one to do because it is so subjective, but I think we'll just have to have a good collective fine eye on what the impact is and whether that's small, you know, big group of people or big and a small group of people, you know, that can span the spectrum for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just weigh in there, Kelly. The Outdoor Equity Subcommittee talked a little bit about how to talk about impact last year, and we didn't really memorialize that in any sort of document, so there might be an opportunity to do that this time around. But for those outdoor equity projects, the subcommittee determined that a big impact on fewer individuals ranked higher for them than a small impact on a lot, like a video that could get 1,000 impressions on Facebook versus a week-long activity for 15 participants. The Outdoor Equity Subcommittee leaned towards the bigger impact on smaller numbers. And so we could try to memorialize that in the materials going forward. I also wanted to note on the subject of sort of the application being pretty simple and straightforward, that's easy to do at small grant amounts because our people who do the money side of things feel more comfortable about the risk if we don't have a lot of background and a lot of detail in those applications. So considering the scale up and the funds available and the likelihood that some of the projects will be bigger, we might need to ask more for bigger projects, and that might be something to think about too.
Davi, is there a cutoff? Like, you know, what is there a number that, okay, above this number, we're going to have to be a lot more specific or rigorous? Is like right now at 10,000, clearly that's below that number. Is there a number where it starts to be a little more meaningful?
I don't know. I could ask our contract staff, but 10,000 was definitely a number that was given to me as a very low risk number. And I think it kind of scales up
Yeah, it'd be nice to know that, because that may help us decide where we want to start cutting off making the line. Because if we start getting into numbers that ODF and W is getting nervous about, how we're maybe being a little more not by the book, or it gives us some more flexibility if we keep the numbers lower, that may be something we want to consider. So maybe you can ask about that.
I'd ask carefully. Don't, sort of that adage of don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think what we should do is have the committee decide how you want to proceed, and then we'll make sure that it's allowed.
Because I don't want to, the things I've really liked hearing is just applicants thinking that it's easy or it's not too onerous, and that we're able to onboard organizations that might not be able to do so to some of the more traditional methods or funding mechanisms. So those are the things we don't want to lose. Okay, well, that's a lot of different things. And I know, and again, our intention is not to say, oh, well, we want to prioritize this, or this is what we want to do. I think we can identify those things as we move forward. And that's always somewhat of a moving target. And this has put out a lot of different things for us to think about. A next level of the discussion is how do we implement those targets? How do we actually, let's say we do decide at some point we really get something from ODF or W says we got to do something about Western pond turtles, and it's very compelling, and that's what we got to do. How do we do that? What structure do we use? And I'll preface this, Mark Labhart's discussion about OWEB. I called Maida Lofsgarten, who was the director of OWEB until recently. She just moved on to the Mount Hood National Forest. And I was asking her these same questions. I had that experience that Mark did with OWEB, and I really liked that focused investment idea where you could really, what they usually choose is a region. Like, okay, we're going to really focus on the Malheur Basin, and we're going to really help them fix the issues with the Malheur Refuge and water quality. And they really got focused on that. But that was in addition to their regular open solicitation process. So it was both. So it occurred to me, well, maybe we could do both. And I talked to Maida about that because I want to be strategic and have impact. And one of the things Maida really hammered on to me, and I was surprised she did it, is she says, you can be really impactful and really strategic just through that open solicitation. She said, don't discard that as your way to getting at your priorities, because you can rank your priorities. You can, I didn't think she was going to really focus on that. So she says, if you just don't have the staff or the wherewithal to like have a whole separate solicitation, like we could say, Western pond turtles, we're going to just do $300,000 for Western pond turtles. Well, maybe we don't have the capacity to do that. And maybe we do, but for instance, you could be if we decide Western pond turtles are a really important species, there's ways that we can tweak our open solicitation so that any Western pond turtle project gets a bit more of a focus, not only in how we rank them, but how we solicit the projects. And so we just have to be thinking about, as we identify priorities, and this might be a good time, Davia, we did identify a few priorities that everyone agreed to. One, or I think pretty much agreed to, is everyone felt there was the importance of that intersection of recreation and conservation. The importance of the simplicity and the onboarding. Those are priorities that we don't want to lose. Were there others that you jotted down that seemed that people focused on? Again, I'm not
Um,
trying to identify this is what our priority is, but just. in
Yeah, well, and
general.
I'd say what we've really talked about in a lot of ways is priorities for how we want to operate going forward, more than exactly what those priorities are. But yeah, those connections with people. And then I think one of the things that we talked about a lot, Carl, that you didn't mention there was collaboration with ODF&W and finding a way to give a boost to projects that are either put forth by ODF&W or have ODF&W as a partner, which is more likely.
So again, with Jane,
So I'm on the Oregon Native Turtle Working Group, and I'm sort of just a little frustrated that I haven't been able to get them to focus on. I mean, ideally, at least the turtles have a working group, which is not true of some species. I know there's maybe been talk of a bat working group. There's definitely a beaver working group. And I'm just struggling with how we get those groups to think beyond what they're already doing and think about, wow, there's money available and this is an opportunity to really do something coordinated and bigger than what we've been doing. Instead, that group seems to leave everybody to their own devices to pick the projects that they want to apply for. And so I don't have an answer here. I'm just saying, you know, it's something maybe ODFW staff needs to think about, is how do we get maybe more functional working groups that can prioritize what needs to be done and figure out how to, you know, what should be applied for and so forth. So, you know, as I say, I don't know how we do that. I just think it needs to be done.
Mark Stern.
Yeah, following up on your point, Jane, as I think about these conservation strategy species, I could see the ODF&W staff saying, here's a group of species for which we need more information on distribution, abundance, and habitat use of, because we don't know enough about them. We need that baseline information. And there might be another set of species that says, we kind of got that part of the question dialed, and we need to do some habitat projects. And these would be the important places to do habitat projects. And that kind of framework, I think, would help us both request projects or prioritize projects, and could potentially also help going back to groups like the, you know, Native Turtle Working Group and saying, here's a little bit of structure and prioritization. You know, how do you see yourself with an opportunity to fit into this? But something like that would, you know, just saying we want to do a project on amphibians, that I'm not quite sure where to go with that, other than, okay, so if it's an amphibian project, they get 1 extra point. But if it was in a sort of that framework that ODF&W staff helped create, you know, we might have a little more confidence that it should be more at the top of the list.
Jane, could you, for those of us not on a working group, is this an official sort of working group? Is this called by ODF&W, or is this just some people that are interested that got together and formed it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember how it first started. I think it first started, it's been going for well over a decade. The participants are from a lot of different agencies. There's usually several people from ODFW. There's people from the conservation districts, from some of the nonprofits, like Wetlands Conservancy usually comes, and so forth. So it's like everybody that's got any involvement in turtle projects. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is there. U.S. Forest Service has a representative. And so it's a nice broad representation of groups. And we are actually meeting Thursday. So this is going to be something we're going to talk about, is how do we move? I mean, we have an old action plan that we haven't updated in a long time of here's what we need to do. But, you know, it's been quite a while since we have revisited that and figured out, you know, what are the things we need to do. It's a little bit more focused than some other activities because the Western pond turtle is being considered as a candidate for listing. So there is some focus on that. And there's a lot of counting turtles going on. There's a lot of, where are the turtles? And are there enough to warrant listing and so forth? But at some point you need to get to how do we make things better for the turtles? Like how do we create more habitat? How do we stabilize breeding populations and not just count them? So, and I think that's probably true of a lot of the species. We need that baseline data, but then we actually need to use that to improve conditions for the species and help save the species and not just create data. So I don't know if that's useful. Ask more questions about that if you have them.
No, that is useful. Does ODF&W convene working groups on like the beaver working group? And are there several of those, or is that a standard thing?
I'd say that it is generally groups that are informal and they're kind of like community of practices. And in a lot of cases, they're convened by ODF&W. We have a forest carnivore working group that looks at fisher and marten and those kind of species in it. And it usually is the land management agencies and members of academia who are interested in those species, but it's not, a formally created by the commission working group, other than the beaver working group, which is a commission working group and has a charge from the commission. So I think they're kind of non-standard, I guess is the answer. And probably a lot of them start or have origins in putting together the Oregon Conservation Strategy and ODF&W staff saying, we know we are not the people in the state that know the most about this group of animals, because that's someone at Oregon State or somebody with the Forest Service. And that's kind of how those come together. But we don't necessarily decide their agendas.
Because again, that's, the mechanism on how we go about this. Part of it is this more of a cohesion with ODF&W, more working with them. And the ideal situation is they had working groups on specific species and that we could then coordinate through them. Mark?
Yeah, hey, Davi, I wondered, I believe ODF&W has different people that work with BPA wildlife mitigation programs. And while that wouldn't cover all the ecoregions in Oregon by any means, it seems like they go through and I'm sort of trying to dust off what I remember from the past, but, prioritize species and habitats. And, I don't know if you've visited with, if they're part of the conservation group within ODF&W that has these conversations, but they might certainly have some priority species or areas or habitats. Does that cross your radar screen?
That's a great point, Mark. And actually, Kelly Reese, I see, is here, who is our Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program Manager. And I don't know if she's paying attention, but Kelly, if you want to weigh in.
Thanks, Davia. No, I appreciate I am multitasking, I'll be honest. We use the Oregon Conservation Strategy to focus our priorities for both species and habitats. So I think there's a lot of overlap with you guys in that respect.
And I think part of the question is, we have the strategy, it's really broad. And then are you prioritizing within that by certain species or conservation opportunity areas? Is a geographic scale that the conservation strategy has?
Right. And we do, thank you. We do focus or encourage projects that use the conservation opportunity areas, either identified through the OCS or through the Nature Conservancy synthesis. So we do look for opportunities to really leverage high priority areas.
And those conservation opportunity areas are areas of the highest biodiversity. That's how those are determined.
Well, those are defined in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, and part of it is it gets incumbent on, because so much of our focus is on that. A lot of our weighting is towards that. Is consistent with Oregon Conservation Strategy. we have to know, each of us has to know what those are. And the applicant has to, if it is in one of those areas, they have to identify that to help us rank those. So we need to really be familiar with the Oregon Conservation Strategy to do this right. Jane?
Hang on. So I think, Kelly, that we have the prioritization of the species and the opportunity areas and so forth. But I think this needs to get down to a finer level of like, okay, Western pond turtles are a priority. What specifically is it that would be helpful? And, you know, beyond counting them, I don't know that we've gotten much to that. So you know, and I don't know where the breakdown is. I feel like the working group certainly has the power to come up with that, but somehow has struggled to do so. And I think that's maybe true with other species. It's like, what exactly is it that that organizations or agencies could specifically, what are the action items?
Yeah, Jane, I agree with you. And I think that's kind of what we're talking around today is does the committee want to go beyond that? And that would take another step from ODF&W to help get you that kind of level. You know, if you look at the conservation strategy page, and we'll just keep using the pond turtle example. So if you're watching, that's not necessarily everything we're going to do, but that's a good example. We have conservation actions like providing basking structures and nesting habitat. So the Applegate project that was funded in the first round of the OCRAC would have hit that metric of an action that's listed as something to do for that species. And then just thinking about that Applegate project, that was just in case you don't remember, it was a private land restoration project on a pond that was building basking structures. You know, we could have further stratified that by looking to see if that pond was in a conservation opportunity area on top of that. So there's opportunity there. And I think it gets to the question, I think that Mark Stern asked about the current funding round of, you know, what's a 6 on that OCS linkage. And that's something I think that we can work on after this meeting in advance of the next opportunity, is that we can propose something and say a 6 is addressing a high priority species for ODF&W in an ecoregion within a conservation opportunity area and addressing a key conservation issue. You know, that is northwestern pond turtle in a conservation opportunity area and a climate smart project, right? And that's a 6. And then a 5 would be only one of those things. And, you know, we could kind of stratify things that way, and that might help you.
And it's also helpful, especially if you do it early on for the applicant. And part of this is to let the applicant know what it is we're looking for and what kind of projects we'd like to see. Davy, it occurred to me that, like with the changes in the funding for ODF&W and the development of the habitat division, do you see better ways for us to interact with ODF&W because of that, or is it way too early? Are there ways to build that as you guys are building that, where we can be part of that? You know, it's kind of, so it's a little more seamless. And
I think there's going to need to be connections with the new habitat division and with the wildlife and fish divisions as well. And so I think the mission of OCRF is broad enough that we should work on building those connections kind of across the board. And we can do that by, you know, bringing those staff to these meetings, maybe someday field trips to see our staff in the field and things like that. But I think, yes, Carl, I think that is something we should be doing going forward. And it could be, you know, we're looking at bringing in current grantees to give updates on what they're doing. We could start bringing in ODF and W staff to talk about different priority areas.
Marat?
I was thinking that maybe one thing we could do to make it easier for ourselves on the application, and I understand this could make the application slightly more complicated, but put the responsibility of how it's consistent with the Oregon Conservation Strategy on the applicant, and put, mention the conservation strategy areas and the species and all that, so they deliver that information to us. I mean, I know we should all be reading it, and it's a wonderful document. It's huge. And I've taken some swings at it, but I don't know it. And we could put that responsibility on the applicant.
Yeah, I think I like that. It gets them looking at the Oregon Conservation Strategy as well. I'm going to just throw this out there because this is the time frame that we were going to talk about it. Mark Labhart's suggestion, kind of building on what OWEB does, what's the committee's sense of or feel for, say, having something outside of our open solicitation, which has been successful, and we can hone that down better. But what's the sense of having, because we do have some funding. Is it enough funding to, say, open up a specific area we'd like to focus on? Say, I mean, we keep using Western pond turtles just because it's up there. So we could look at our budget and say, well, we can do 2 more funding rounds in the biennium after the one we're planning on, and we'll have, and I don't know if this is accurate, say $300,000 left, where we would have a solicitation for Western pond turtles or for climate associated projects or for beaver habitat projects. I'm just curious what the committee's take is on that. If that's something we would want to think about tackling, something that just to keep in mind as a possibility as priorities come up. What do y'all think about that?
This is Kelly. Sorry, I was finishing my meal here. I think it would be good to possibly do that in the future, but I don't know if right now. I feel like we're still establishing protocols and process. Again, I wasn't in on the first bit of the first couple application rounds, but I feel like if we continue to tighten these up, and like you said, I kind of agree with Maida too, that we can still continue to like keep a focus, on certain subjects while still moving forward. All right. Without, because then we either need to have then also different criteria for those, or sort of, it's just a little bit more onerous for the group, I think, right now to go into like a different kind of a round, but I'm supportive of it in the future if it keeps looking good like this.
Yeah, I think we should keep thinking on it too. I think it is, and I guess I look at it from the standpoint, and I feel like I need a little more guidance from the ODF and W staff on how we would define those priority or FIP type projects that we'd want to focus on. But I think if we can work through that, then I like the idea of sort of having a focus as well as the open solicitations. But I think we need to really, I don't know what that priority would be yet. And I feel like I need the ODF and W staff to help us shape that some.
Okay.
At the Thursday Turtle Working Group meeting, I think I'll use them as guinea pigs. And I'll say, okay, here's this opportunity. The OCRF committee really wants to is interested in turtle projects, but you guys really have to get your act together and, figure out what the highest priorities are and figure out who's going to apply for that money. And so forth. And that might help inform some of the other species. You know, if we use them as guinea pigs and say, okay, here's an opportunity, but you have to be more focused. Then, you know, we could use what we learned from working with that group to, you know, maybe there's a bat group that convenes just for this purpose. Maybe it's not like an ongoing working group, but it's a, you know, getting all the bat experts in the state together, all the people who are working on bat issues, and at least have, you know, one long meeting where they talk about, okay, what are the most important things and who's involved in, you know, what do we want people to, you know, what are the key things that we need money for?
Jane, that I like that a lot. I mean, in part, if we're able to, and that's how we have, the whole purpose of this conversation is how do we have impact? I mean, we have some money, but it's still limited. I mean, we're all pretty proud of the fact that we're spending $3.5 million, but that's still not a big thing. How else can we have impact? And if we can have impact through that by kind of making the working group figure out exactly how they want to proceed, and then we can facilitate that, that may be a model or a template for us to move forward. So it's pretty informal, but I think that's certainly worth your effort to ask that question. And that's not too different than what OWEB does, because they say they pick certain groups or areas and say, hey, why don't you come up with a plan? And we'll decide if we're going to fund it. And it's kind of similar to that. So that might be a good way to look into it. Since we keep mentioning Western pond turtles, and that might be a nice way to look at it. So so does that sound okay for the rest of the committee, for her to sort of ask that question and see where it ends up? We haven't committed anything, but it might be interesting. All right, well, that's useful right there. And hopefully that could inform, you know, future priorities as they arise. And clearly we have to be more and more aligned with ODF and W, and Davia, that's for a lot of ways you and the new staff person to try to figure out how we'll make that happen.
Yeah, and if I can just sort of do a process check here, what I'm hearing, the general sentiment, and we should get a thumbs up if people agree with this, is that this next opportunity that we're planning to open by the end of this year and have the commission approved by June, that we would run that as an open solicitation as we have, but do more to hone our criteria to really bring certain things to the top. And that we'll keep talking about this idea of some potentially focused project pot money in the future.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing. Is that what people are hearing?
Any amendments?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this open solicitation has been too effective. You know, it's been great. We don't want to stop that. We can make it better. And in fact, I think we sort of come to a spot where I hoped we would get in this discussion. And the next, we're way ahead of schedule in that sense. So Davia, I think that's enough for us to chew on. And Jane's going to come back to us. What I would like to talk about for the last part here, rather than taking a break, maybe we can just clean this up and be done. We also had some great discussions about our current, and I think we're going to need to do our funding, our evaluation. We already said we're going to do it with our previous framework. So for this one, let's pretty much stick with that. However, we just are going to have another open solicitation. There are ways we can be, I think we can tune up our ask as well as how we evaluate them. We can make our what do you call it, our evaluation sheet a lot better, and like how can we edit that to, and that's something that Davia and I can work on. Are there ways that we can sort of tune something up that we might bring back to you in December to make that a better process? Is that kind of where you were thinking, Davia, as far as something deliverable that we could do between now and then?
Yes. So what we put out in the notice of opportunity in August for this most recent opportunity was that we would open another opportunity with $750,000 available for grants up to $50,000. I think we said mid-November, but I'm thinking at this point, if we could get it out after the December 6th meeting, that would be really good timing to make sure that you all feel confident in what we're putting out there. And that would be going to the commission in June or July of next year for their approval. So we'd have it open for 2 to 3 months, giving people time to look at it over the holidays too, I guess. But I think the important things that we need available for that is our expenditure framework and our application. And those are pretty well related, but like Carl mentioned, also the criteria. And there's a couple things I've heard. There's a few things in how we define conservation and recreation that I think we should take a look at and see if it still applies. I think the recreation pieces were a little more narrow than perhaps we intended. I've also heard some feedback that our application feels like a conservation application, and there's maybe some ways that we can make changes like that. And so I'm hoping that you all took a look at the expenditure framework and have some suggestions there. If not, I can take it away and mark it up with what I've heard already from other folks and what I've heard from you on the priorities from today. But the goal would be to adopt that at the December 6th meeting.
Mark Stern?
Well, Davia, I think if you can mark it up, it would be helpful. I also think, at least for me, we haven't reviewed any applications in a while now. And, we had a good discussion today. This next process of going through this round of applications, at least for me, may help, based on the conversation today, feed some additional feedback into, what we might like that next offering, to how we might amend, or other edits we might make to the scoring, or the other things you're looking at. So I don't know if there's a way to, for you to share something with us sooner that we think about, and then also get you some feedback prior to the December 6th meeting, so that if people do have additional thoughts based on reviewing all of these, it sort of daylight themselves. I'm kind of rambling there, but I think you get where I'm sort of pointing to.
Yeah, if I could summarize, Mark, I'd say that I can put a draft of changes out there and have committee members respond by email. And then we will come to the December 6th meeting with a second version of those changes with the hope to make them final.
Yeah, that'd be great. The other idea I had, and I'm not advocating it, but sort of going back to, you mentioned the staff was promoting those 3 groups. In a scoring situation, we could just say any proposal that's within supporting amphibians, reptiles, or bats, gets 1 extra point. And it's a very mild incentive, and maybe just more noise than it's worth, but trying to think of a way to help encourage that group to join the conversation.
Well, Mark, that's going to be informed by just what you said. As we go through these projects, it's going to refresh our memories about that, and we'll see it in it. And then maybe 2 points might make a difference, and that may be a mechanism to address some of those priorities, just so that we're at least sure we're focusing on appropriate things. Again, there's a lot of different. This has been a great discussion for me, because I know that I wanted to feel like we were open and inclusive and doing all the good things we've done, but at the same time, I wanted to feel like we were focused and had some impact on important things. And I think this is helping us figure out how we're going to do that. And this is all going to change. Our priorities will change. Different species will come up. But if we have a nice framework on how we would deal with that in place, then it's just going to be much more productive. So I appreciate the effort and the thinking going into this. So yeah, instead of keeping this meeting going longer than we need to, if I'd ask you to use that extra time to think about what Mark just said, and as you're going through these processes, we'll get Davia to give us a little bit of feedback, and then think about how we might tune that up. Really put a little thought and effort, maybe write something down and get it back to Davia so that we can really buff it up. That sounds good. All right, great.
Brett?
I was looking at the agenda and noticed we kind of skipped over the M word, monitoring budget. You know, nobody likes to do monitoring, but I feel it would be so important for us to go back and take a look at some of our other projects that we've funded. We've heard from a few people, but it would be very important for us to know what happened with our first set of projects. Was that money spent as intended? And were there some problem areas that we need to be aware of? And I know that you've got way too much on your plate, Davia, to do that. And your new assistant could maybe take that on, but, you know, following up with each one of those groups and finding out what they did and make sure they have used that money well.
Brett, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's really important. And one of the things that in talking to people that have been in this business for a long time, that they're most impressed about, if they took the time to look at our framework, is that emphasis we put on monitoring. And we really got to make that part of who we are. But I think you pointed out one of the issues, and that is Davia is pretty stretched. However, we have money allocated. 5% of what we spent is allocated to monitoring. We can make the decision to, and that might be something to think about. You can hire, this happened on OWEB. Again, I think both for Mark Labhart and myself, a lot of what we do is informed by our experience on OWEB, but they outsourced monitoring. They hired an organization that's what they do. They went back, talked to people, gathered data. We would direct them in terms of the qualitative and quantitative data that we wanted, but they actually do the footwork on it. And I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe we should even think about that, going ahead and spending that money. So we've had 2 complete funding rounds. We could go back and look at those projects. Jane?
I think we can put more of the onus on the organizations. I know that Davia has been doing some follow-up with them, but maybe, I don't know, Davia, would it help if we formalize that process a little bit? And when people applied for the money or when they got the money, they knew they were going to be reporting back to us in 6 months or a year, and just writing a report that had maybe some components that, yeah.
We actually have in the contracts for all of our projects a report that's due at the end of the term of the contract. And the very first round, pretty much all of those end January 2nd, 2023. And so I think one of the things that we can and should be doing, and I just haven't had the capacity, is posting those reports so that you all can have a look at them as those projects come in. So we've probably got 5 to 10 or so of those reports in from those projects. And that's a good starting point and material to be provided to someone who might do something more rigorous.
I kind of feel like outsourcing it doesn't necessarily help, because I think we're the ones who have to be paying attention, and the onus could be on the organization.
They gather that when they outsource it, they just gather the data for us.
Mhm.
They come to us. I mean, it's like, here's what we found. We're the ones that act on and get the information. It's just that it's not getting Davia or our overstretched staff member to do it. So just remember, we do have that funding in place to make that happen. And we don't have enough projects that are done yet really to make that happen.
That was going to be my other comment, is that I think if you wanted to take that level of outsourcing, that you would give it another year, in terms of, a lot of our projects have a grant period through the beginning of 2023. And so a lot of our projects are going to be ongoing for a little while. And so there might be, a startup phase before you would want to get into that level of monitoring. And that might be the end of this biennium. And I think I'll say also that I'm currently willing to sign up the person who takes the OCRAC coordinator job for a lot of fun things. And so this will definitely be on the list for that person to think about the right way to help you have the information you need to answer key questions.
I was also thinking that one of the criteria we've talked about as a priority is continuing funding successful projects. And so that's where we really need to know if we have somebody coming in for round 2 of funding, did they do what they said they were going to do with round 1?
Davia, do we have a timetable for the staff person?
I'm hoping that we will have them on board in January.
Right.
January 1st, ideally, but end of January at a minimum.
All right. Is there any other, anything else the members would like to talk about?
I would just say quickly, while we're on the monitoring topic, I feel like you also should scale. I know it's our monitoring, but what we ask of people too, to the amount of money we're asking for too. Obviously, just like you said earlier too, with bigger applications, more money out, you do want a lot more detail. So again, if you're doing these 10 or 20s, again here, like the OWEB small grant program, it's grants up to 15,000. And so you turn in a final report, and then you turn in a report 2 years after the project has ended. And I really like that because it does give you a continuation of whether your project is continuing to be successful and or you need to do some adaptive management or, some different effectiveness, because it does help to inform your other projects when you take a longer look at it too. So anyway, that's all I would just say is it's important to look at monitoring, but we have to think about the scale of projects we're funding as well.
Thank you. That is also part of the reason why when you outsource them, it's not as onerous to the person that did the project. That you got somebody who's kind of doing that work. They're going out and checking it out. Mark, Labhart?
Well, on the topic of anything else, I chatted with Davia about filling the Northeast position, and doesn't sound like we've heard anything. So what I'll do is I'll reach out to Jason Miner through an email and ask him what the plans are for filling that position, because it's been over a year since we filled that position. So trying to put a little bit of pressure on him to get that position filled. So
we did have what I thought was a very qualified applicant for that position, and I think she's still interested. I think she might still be interested.
okay, I'll reach out to him, see.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do not.
Okay. Well, do you want me to, maybe I can reach out to her and see if she's interested, and tell Jason that, look, we got a great applicant.
Yeah, see if their application is still on file and see if it's still in there.
So I'll do that, and then I'll get back to you, and
okay,
and that might give us a little more emphasis. Okay, great.
sounds good.
Thanks for bringing that up. All right, we have public comment time, right, Davia? We do that before we're done. So we would open that up to the members of the audience if anyone has anything they would like to comment. Did you get anything, Davia? I don't see anything here in the chat stuff.
Well, we'll give them a little more time, and I'll call out Mike and Greg particularly the rest of our audience's ODFW staff, who are also welcome to make comment, but let us know. I had a other business that I wanted to mention is that the, oh, maybe Mike, do you want to make comment first?
Just real quickly, Carl, just appreciate the conversation and kind of watching the processes. Obviously, OHA is one of your applicants, so I'm not here to advocate for our recent application there, but the conversation that I heard earlier between that Tim Davis and Jane were outlined, we're talking about that link between conservation and recreation. You know, as we introduce young people to hunting, one of Oregon's oldest forms of recreation in our state, it's not just about firearm safety and wildlife and equipment and preparation. It's about ethics and it's about conservation right from the beginning. And that's how we grow new conservationists that branch out into all sorts of things, both game and not game. And I just thought that was a really pertinent conversation. So appreciate all your work and looking forward to working with you guys some more.
Sorry, Mike, we really appreciate you participating in our meetings and being there. It really, really says a lot that you've supported us like you have and have been there for us. So thank you.
All right, so my other business is the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is ODFW's #1 congressional priority. And it's a piece of legislation I've talked to you about before, but the top line message is dedicating $1.4 billion to state and tribal fish and wildlife conservation through an existing federal account that funds our wildlife and sport fish restoration programs. And just wanted to mention it because there's been some progress. The bill is in the Senate now. It has over 30 sponsors in the Senate, completely bipartisan, which is really great. Huge chunk of the senators have put their name on it. We're expecting a hearing on that in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee in December. And Senator Merkley from Oregon is on that committee and is not yet a co-sponsor of the bill. And so here's my call to action to our committee members and the audience. If you have any connections to Senator Merkley or other organizations that have the opportunity to help spread the message that this is really important work for implementing the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And now we've got this incredible structure in place through the OCRF to help guide ODF&W on how we make expenditures should that money come in. And I guess I didn't mention it's $25 million a year for Oregon if it passes. And that would be for implementing the Oregon Conservation Strategy. We can spend up to 15% of it on outdoor education and wildlife associated recreation. And so that would play into the OCRF work as well. And so Senator Wyden is not yet a sponsor either. He's a lower tier target because he's not on the committee, but definitely would love his support too. And then in the House, 3 out of the 5 Oregon representatives are currently co-sponsors. And so we're looking to target Representative Schrader and Representative Bentz to seek their support. And we think there'll be a hearing on that in December as well in the House Natural Resources Committee. Or I guess it had a hearing already, so it would be a markup, a vote out of that committee in December. So this is the furthest along in the congressional process Recovering America's Wildlife Act has gotten. It's got a lot of really good momentum, a lot of really good partners in DC that are working on this. The Nature Conservancy and the National Wildlife Federation and the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation are at the head of that, but a couple hundred organizations have signed on. So just want to let you guys know where that's going. And that ODF&W is now kicking off a planning effort as part of our 2023-2025 budget. In case we have $25 million in new federal funds to spend in 2023, we're working on what that would look like. And so there'll be more news on that early next year.
Davia, do you have bill numbers on that, or could you send those to us?
Yep. So the House bill is HR 2773. And the Senate bill is like the same numbers in a different order. It's 2372.
How many representatives, how many sponsors in the House are there?
132.
All right. That's
Is it
close to half.
bipartisan in the House too?
It is, yeah.
That's close to half.
It's getting there, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it looks like it's 30 Republicans and 100 Democrats.
Nice. That'll be great. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Otherwise, I think we finished this off early. I appreciate everyone's comments. That was great. That it? All right. Well, thank you all, and we'll meet again in December. And by then, you'll have looked at these projects. Adios.
See you later.